Hello and welcome to episode 1 of Louis Bertou's Music Reviews. Today we're talking about a bit of an obscure one, but one that I think needs to be talked about. And that is Gérard Grisey's Quatre Chants pour Franchir le Seuil. I think that's the best time I've said that, actually. It's about take 5, by the way, so yeah. Going for the low editing approach. What you see is what you get. So anyway, Quatre Chants pour Franchir le Seuil roughly translates in English, it's French, to 4 songs to cross the threshold. Now, I think what Grisey is referring to here is the threshold of life into death. So essentially this is 4 songs to die to. Yeah. Pretty heavy topic for a piece of music, if you ask me. It's made even heavier by the fact that this was to be Grisey's last piece. And not in the sense that he stopped composing after this, in the literal sense that, yeah, he did pass on not soon after this piece of music, which is terribly sad. He did die around 56, I believe. So yeah, he was too soon for sure. But it does it lends extra weight to this piece, I think, and the themes, yeah, of kind of crossing from life into death. Yeah, it just adds a level of darkness and also intensity to the music, I think. So yeah, let's talk about the music. This is such a weird piece. It like the ensemble seems functional at first glance. You've got kind of woodwinds, your brass, percussion. There's a voice as well, so very standard groupings of instruments, standard classical groupings of instruments. But then we actually break it down. Like, I had a look at the score, and there was, in the woodwind section, I think there's a bass clarinet and then a contrabass clarinet. No real clarinet, regular, sorry. Just those 2 bass ones. Similarly, there's saxophones. And then the string section is essentially just 3 strings. 1 double bass, 1 cello, and 1 violin. So, yeah, take from that what you will. It's certainly not your average classical ensemble. Similarly, in the percussion section, I think Grisey's use of percussion in general is incredibly imaginative and fascinating. Just really great to listen to. But yeah, the section includes steel pans. So yeah, slightly Caribbean vibes going on in this one, actually. So yeah, listen out for that. So that's the instrumentation. So I should also mention that obviously this ensemble is a chamber ensemble, which means it's not made for the orchestral realm. It is more chamber music, music you can play in a room. Chambre, room. So yeah, that's the ensemble. And right from the get-go, movement 1, this first chant to cross the threshold, we're immediately met with sort of all the instruments coming in at once. It's not like one instrument first and the next and the next. They all sort of slide in, and then listening to that first movement is a lot like just sort of opening a door and you're in a room. You're immediately in the sound world that Grisey wants to create. And it's certainly not a pleasant one. This, for me, sounds like the soundtrack to walking through a wasteland or a purgatory type situation. You've kind of got like weird trees made of bones on one side, you've got a lake of fire on the other side. You're kind of just wandering alone. And then this is the music that plays, I would say, personally. So yeah. I say the ensemble comes in full. One sonic device that Grisey withholds is the voice, because after all, this piece is a piece for vocal solo and 15 instrumentalists. So the voice is withheld until I think around 2 minutes in, and then it comes in, and then you're like, oh, okay, there's a voice in here. Wow. Oh. I think having the voice in there definitely lends weight to these kind of dark themes. I think having a human element, especially when you're talking about, like, I don't know, life and death, it just seems kind of important. So yeah, that's kind of the first movement. You kind of got this strange trudging music made from these instruments, and then the singer kind of dancing over the top of it in this slightly disturbing way. And then the second movement, essentially it's really just fabricated on this very simple motif, essentially a 3-note motif repeated over and over again, with the notes subtly changing each time. This 3-note motif, it's really centered on the instrument of the harp and its low register, which has this really nice bassy fat sound. So whenever those 3 notes are played, it's like a really resonant, satisfying kind of sound. And that's really, I mean, you could call it pop music if you like. The amount of times that theme does recur is quite repetitive, really. So yeah, that's the second movement, 3-note motif, and that really is the personality of that second movement, I think. Yeah, I mean, I should say also the second movement is incredibly dark sounding. Like, you're not out of the purgatory place yet, certainly not. I mean, some would argue you're not until the piece finishes. I mean, I personally think there's elements of light and humour in this piece as well that will come up later, but until now, we're in the shit. So, we've talked about movements 1 and 2. Let's talk about movement 3. Now, I should say this is a shorter movement, and it seems slightly more inconsequential on first listen, but I think multiple listens really does uncover some of the hidden subtleties of it, and I think a lot of those subtleties can be tied to the percussion section, especially during the second half of the piece. This percussion section, the way Grisey writes that section, is so subtle, so softly dramatic. It's hard to explain, really. I did write down a specific moment where essentially the percussionist is instructed to bow crotales. And crotales, for those who don't know, are basically pitched cymbals all in a line. So you essentially have, imagine it like a piano, you've got these tiny cymbals, a chromatic scale of them, and he's been instructed to bow them with a percussion bow, or just like a violin bow even. And what it does is it creates this sustained sort of glassy metallic tone in the very high register, and it's very off-putting to hear because you kind of immediately think, oh, that's an electronic synthesizer, but this is classical music. What's going on? But it turns out it's a bowed crotale. So around 3 minutes 30 in, he starts bowing these cymbals, creating these horrible dissonant sort of chords, these strange harmonies, and then right at the point when they're crescendoing, he drops this chord on the glockenspiel, which is a little mallet instrument, and it just comes at just the right moment. You'll get used to hearing the crotales. You're like, okay, this sustained sound, and then suddenly he drops in this janky chord on the glockenspiel, and it's just like clang. It's just very dramatic, I think. And he follows this, like, he immediately gets your attention with this kind of dropping of the chord on the glockenspiel, and he takes that and he uses it. He's like, okay, I've got your attention, now how can I hold it? Okay, so I've been using the high frequencies, I bring in the low frequency, and he starts beating a bass drum very softly, almost inaudibly, but you feel it. You feel that low register. It's very off-putting. I mean, I think the key word of this piece is off-putting. As a tangent, it's kind of a strange one to begin with, I think, especially given that I have absolutely no followers or no audience for this on YouTube. It's a strange one to start with, but I think, why not? I was listening to it recently. It's kind of fresh in my mind, get my thoughts on it out there. Yeah. So anyway, we're talking about that percussion section. And yeah, the way he writes percussion in that third movement is very telling of what's going to happen in the fourth movement. Now that movement, the intro to that movement, I'm going to say stop listening to me if you're still here. Well, I thank you if you're still here, but yeah, stop listening to me and listen to the intro of that fourth movement. The way he writes for percussion is just, like, I'm a drummer and I'm envious of the rhythms that he's able to create, and not just create but coordinate over the entire percussion section. Like, he'll have one percussionist playing this rhythm, this sustained rhythm on one drum, and then he fades in another percussionist playing this totally different rhythm. So they have to essentially block out all other noise and just focus on the rhythm they have. Don't listen to the other percussionist, or else you just get lost. Yeah, and essentially it's just these crisscrossing rhythms from different percussionists, overlapping, getting louder, getting quieter, weaving this kind of almost tapestry of sound, unpitched sound. And there's a particular moment at around 2 minutes 10. I wrote this down, obviously, because it blew me away so much. When it feels like everything just changes gear. Like this drum just crescendos, and then suddenly there's a bam of the bass drum, and then the rhythm totally changes, and it just feels like you've been going in one direction, and then suddenly you swerve around in the other direction. It's like a genuine physical reaction I get from hearing that. Yes, it's just wonderful. Yeah. So yeah, that's movement. What is this? Movement 4. So this. What's strange is it's called Quatre Chants. Okay, 4 songs, but there's 5 movements. So I don't really know what's going on with that. But essentially, we're on 4th movement. There's one more left. So don't be thinking we're done. No, there's one more. But yeah, this 4th movement, percussion intro. After that percussion intro, things shift gear yet again, and we're met with this really quite extraordinary section. I mean, I can only describe it as it sounds like if you're in like a desert, and I don't actually know where I'm going with this. I was going to say something like when you're in a desert and you hear rattlesnakes. It kind of sounds like that. Obviously more nuanced and serious. But to be honest, despite the themes of death and the dark tones to this piece, there is moments of humour, especially in this section here, the second section of the 4th movement. I think like it just makes me smile. It's just so funny sounding. And yeah, the singer, the soprano, is brought in essentially not singing but shrieking in this section, and I think it adds to the humour really, because it's not like a blood curdling scream or anything. It kind of just sounds like a yippee almost. Yeah. So yeah, it's a great movement, great moment, great piece. So yeah. And then movement 5 is quite. It feels like it's wrapping up the whole thing. It does it very well. So another shorter section, much like the second movement. Sorry, third movement. Yeah, a much shorter section. So we have long, long, short, long, short. And this piece to me, this movement to me seems to occupy an A-B-A structure. We begin with an A section. We don't know it's the A section yet. It morphs into a B section. Again, we don't know it's the B section just yet. But when that A section returns, we're immediately like, oh, okay, we've returned home. And it really does feel like that. I think that A section is very poignant when it's repeated. I think one of the reasons why that is the case is because it's one of the only instances where Grisey actually explicitly repeats himself in this piece. So you've been kind of fed on transitions and sections that don't seem very related to each other, and suddenly this final movement has this very obvious recapitulation of the A section, and then it just does feel like it's just such a wonderful way to end a piece. And I think that does move us on to another area I'd like to explore with this review, which is Grisey's use of form, musical form. When I say form, I'm kind of relating to, in the traditional sense, you'd have verse, chorus, that would be a form. Similarly, like the ABA structure we talked about before was a form. But composers like Grisey, they get creative with their forms. So, like for example, if you have a 50-minute piece based on overtones and overtones only, so for if that's what you want to do, then you're immediately met with the challenge of, well, how do I make this interesting? And not just how do I make it interesting, but how do I make it meaningful as well? Because I think that's one of the things about music. It does have to have a meaning, even if it's not an explicit one, even if it's just the meaning that it creates in another listener, outside of the composer's own world. And that's one thing I think that Grisey does better than the other spectralist composers. Did I mention Grisey was a spectralist? He didn't like the term, but we kind of call him one anyway. Yeah. So I think that's one thing he did better than the other spectralists, is this approach to form. Like when I listen to a Grisey piece, it feels like it was meant to be, especially one like Quatre Chants. It genuinely does feel like it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. and it progresses in a way that feels like it couldn't be done any other way. I think that's how you know you've hit upon a good creative form, when A, it's never been done, and B, you couldn't imagine it done any other way. I think anyway. And Grisey does talk in an interview, well, maybe in interviews, I don't know, but in one interview that I saw, he did mention Stockhausen, Karlheinz Stockhausen, as a major influence on his approach to form. And it's not difficult, to see why. When you look at Stockhausen's work, it's as disparate as any. Like, one piece is totally different from the next. And in order to do that over a whole career, you have to have a very creative approach to form. You have to know, okay, what do I have here, and how do I make it a thing? Like, I might have this really good thing, but I don't know how to actually create it, to manipulate it in such a way that it flows from beginning to end. So yeah, that's one point I did want to raise about Grisey's music in general, is fantastic forms, and none so more evident than in this piece right here. I realise I've talked for a long time here. There's more to cover. I'm just going to have a quick look through my notes and just make sure I'm not missing anything huge. I would just say this is one of the most dense and dark but fascinating and overall exciting dramatic pieces of 20th century classical music. It was released in 1998, so turn of the millennium. I say released in 1998, sorry, the premiere of this piece was 1998. This recording that we're talking about here, the Kairos recording, was released in 2001, a couple of years after, and that really is the one I'd recommend you listen to of all of the recordings out there. I'd say, yeah, this is like the keyword of albums in Louis Berthou's album reviews. We're talking about this specific record here of the piece, if you get what I mean. And yeah, I do just love to put this on and just get sucked into its sound world, and for that reason it gets a 9 out of 10 for me. Yeah. Thanks for listening. I need to come up with a better outro, but yeah, thanks for listening. Anyone who's watched this, I couldn't appreciate it more, and I'm just here to facilitate a discussion based around music. I don't just listen to this kind of music, as you'll see from later reviews. I listen to it all, so feel free to recommend me stuff. We'll get on fine. Yeah, see you in episode 2.